going to have Mr. Joseph Campbell talk to us about Finnegan's Wake. You know, Mr. Campbell is the authority on folklore and mythology, and he will be able to explain many of the references in Finnegan's Wake. For myself, all I'll say is that when my wife and I were in Dublin, one of the lectures I was asked to give in the summer course in the National University was on Joyce. Now there is an illusion that's been spread that Joyce is banned in Dublin, and I'm happy to inform you that that is not the case. The students in the National University and the professors in the National University know a tremendous lot about Joyce, and we had a very good audience for the lecture on Joyce. 2 lectures on Joyce. Now that's all I'm going to say. I'm just going to call on Mr. Campbell to read us from Finnegan's Wake and make some of the explanations. Mr. Campbell, Mr. Joseph Campbell.
River run past even Adams, from swerve of shore to bend of bay, brings us by a commodious vicus of recirculation back to Howth Castle and environs. Sir Tristram, violaire d'amours over the short sea, had passed on corps re-arrived from North America on this side of the scraggy isthmus of Europe Minor to wield or fight his peninsulate war. Nor had Topsawyer's rocks by the stream Oconee exaggerated themselves to Lawrence County's gorgios while they went doubling their mumper all the time. Nor a voice from afire below said, Misha, Misha, to Tauf Tauf throughout Petrick. Not yet, though very soon after, had a kid scab attended a bland old Isaac. Not yet, though all's fair in vanity, were saucy sisters wroth with Tronath and Joe. Wrought a peck of Pa's malt had Jem or Shen brewed by Arclight, and Rory and too the Regan brow is to be seen rings him on the aquaface. The fall. Bam bam badal harag the communaron con bron tonaron twan thun, tro var horn on scorn to horden and fanuk. Of a once wall-straight old par is retailed early in bed and later on life down through all Christian minstrelsy. The great fall of the off-wall entailed at such short notice the shoot of Finnegan, earth's solid man, that the Humpty Hill head of himself promptly sends an unquiring one well to the west in quest of his Tumpty Tumptoes, and their upturned pike point in place is at the knock out in the park, where oranges have been laid to rust upon the green since Devlin's first loved Livy. Now that's the first page. It's a familiar page to all, and it seemed to me the best possible way to start a new year of the James Joyce Society, simply by opening with this celebrated passage. Since Padraic Colum has said I would say a few words of explanation, I think I'd better do so.
You better.
The passage begins with a small letter, indicating that we are not beginning, but simply entering into a sphere that has been there all the time without us, a timeless, eternally revolving sphere of the river of time. The last sentence, which I shall read presently, ends without a period and links back to this one, so that the book itself runs in a circle. The river here is the river Liffey, that runs past Dublin, Dublin being the world scene. Dublin is regarded here as the sleeping giant whose head is the Hill of Howth and whose feet turn up in Phoenix Park at the other end, well to the west. The Humpty Hill head of himself is the Hill of Howth, and the Tumpty Tumptoes are in Phoenix Park, and in between is this great giant belly, the city of Dublin, with all the living of the world in it. River run past Even Adams. Even Adams is a little abbey, I think, or church.
It's a church along the Liffey
in Dublin, and here the Even Adams, Adam and Eve's, yes. Here it's Even Adams, is the Garden of Paradise, which is identified with Phoenix Park.
It's close to Phoenix Park, the churches.
Yes. The Phoenix Park idea here indicates immediately the fall and redemption motif, death and resurrection. The park itself is identified with paradise, with the park of Adam and Eve. from swerve of shore to bend of bay, river run past even Adams, from swerve of shore to bend of bay. Once the Liffey enters the Dublin Bay, it follows the waters swirl north in a swerve of shore and then out to the Hill of Howth. These two little themes, swerve of shore to bend of bay, give us, right in the beginning, a motif that will occur frequently through the book. The shore is identified with Ireland, of course, and it is the lure of the temptress, and these serpentine sounds, swerve and shore, occur frequently through the book in connection with the swish of the temptress's skirts. The bend of bay is Dublin Bay bending, falling, crashing, going broke on the shore. This motif of the eternally invading waters is carried in a later historical motif with the eternal invaders that come from the other island across the Dublin Bay to enter the continually receiving land of Ireland. Only a few pages later, this bay becomes the bay for Dibbling, bay spelt then B-E-Y, being the invading Pasha from the east. The river run brings us, by a commodious vicus of recirculation, back to Howth Castle and environs. The commodious vicus of recirculation is the law of recirculating history that is announced by the 17th century philosopher Vico in his work, The New Science. The idea there is, briefly, that history runs through four periods. An early period of belligerent giants, which gives way to a period of reverent patriarchs following the sound of a thunderclap. This sound is interpreted by the pious as the voice of God, challenging them and rebuking them for their sins, and they buckle in to the tiller's life. These fathers then bring forth a generation of prosperous sons who become the aristocrats of the second age, the age of the sons. And these then are in the third age regarded as the exploiters by the people, in the age of the people. The age of the people brings all to an equal status again, which precipitates the general battle of the giants, which brings us back to the first age, which ends when the thunderclap, the atom bomb, the annihilation of the atom, as Joyce calls it, carries us all back to the fear of God again, and this whole cycle begins going round, round, round. This commodious vicus of recirculation brings us back to Howth Castle and environs. Howth Castle and environs is spelt with capital letters H-C-E, indicating that the presence of the hero is shining through the landscape here. His name is H.C. Earwicker. He's called also Here Comes Everybody. Whenever the initials H-C-E occur in any context whatsoever in this book, you have the feeling of Finnegan, or H.C.E. rather, Earwicker, shining through. Now it's this eternal presence of the hero and of the heroine, Anna Livia Plurabelle, whose name also shines through initially throughout the book. It is this eternal presence of this eternal pair that is the great dynamism of this book. Their polarity manifests itself through all polarities in this universe. In this way, the book, in a way, can be compared to purgatory, where the soul moving toward God learns to see the divine image through all things. In hell, through the same things, the soul is cut off from the divine image. In purgatory, the realm of purgation, those divine forms are beginning to be perceived through the usually opaque forms of the world. The Lord is in all things. Split the stick, and there is Jesus. This Gnostic pattern is basic to Joyce's imagery in this book. That then is the first three lines. Howth Castle and environs immediately suggest to a Dubliner the name Sir Tristram. Tristram was a noble who came to Ireland with Henry II when Henry II came to conquer. He is also the romantic hero Tristram, who came to Ireland to fetch Iseult back to his uncle Mart. This theme of the young lover coming for the bride of his uncle and then becoming the lover of that bride, and the uncle being, as it were, cut out, is another of the themes of the book. The young love versus the old man wishing to live again the life that formerly he had known. The woman is always the same woman, Livia, whether she is the young bride or the old widow, it's always the same one. The Liffey, circulating past Dublin, rises in the Wicklow Hills as a young dancing girl, goes through the suburbs as a stately, comely matron, moves through the city then as an old scrub woman, carrying the filth and debris of the city out to Father Ocean. There the sun lifts her back into the sky womb, and she falls as rain back in the hills. And this circulation is the river restatement of the vicus that Vico spoke of. All right, Sir Tristram has not yet come. We are starting the cycle all over again. None of the things that are going to happen have happened yet, and yet they did happen in the eon just past. And so these first two paragraphs following this short opening are, as it were, a pause between eons. Now, I don't know whether to attempt this, but I'm going to try.
All right, all
The
right.
Mookse and the Gripes.
Yes.
This little episode is perhaps one of the most celebrated in the book. Serves to illustrate the relationship of the children to each other. The Mookse and the Gripes are the two sons, the Mookse being the younger and the Gripes the older, the Mookse being the Church of Rome, you might say, and the Gripes the Church of Ireland at the time of the conquest of Henry, and their little sister, who is here called Nuvoletta, was identified with Iseult. Joyce starts this way. As my explanations here are probably above your understandings, Lattle Brattons, though as augmentatively uncomparison as Cadwan, Cadwalliner, and Cadwallon, I shall revert to a more expletive method, which I frequently use when I have to sermo with muddled crass pupils. Imagine for my purpose that you are a squad of urchins, sniffly-nosed, gosling-necked, clothy-headed, tangled in your lacings, tingled in your pants, etc., et Cicero. And you, Bruno Nolan, take your tongue out of your inkpot. As none of you know Javanese, I will give all my easy free translation of the old fabulous parable. Alboy Minor, take your head out of your satchel. Audi, Joe Peters, ex Audi, facts, the Mookse and the Gripes. Gents and laytymen, full stoppers and semi-colonials, hybrids and lubbards. Eins within a space, in the weary wide space it wast, wooned a Mookse. The once in this wast all too lonely, arching zits like, broady oval, and a Mookse he would a walking go. My hood, cries Antony Romeo. So one grand summer evening, after a great morning, and his good supper of gammon and spittish, having flabelled his eyes, pilioled his nostrils, vacticinated his ears, and palliumed his throat, he put on his impermeable, seized his impugnable, hopped on his crown, and stepped out of his immobile de rure albo, so called because it was chock full of master plasters, and had gorgeously let out gardens, strewn with cascadas, pentacosticas, orthodox, and currycombs, and set off from Ludstown a spasso to see how badness was badness in the weirdest of all pensable ways. As he set off, with his father's sword, his lancia spizzata, he was girded on. And with that between his legs and his tark heels, our once and only brag spear, he clanked, to my clinking, from V-toes to three-top, every inch of an immortal. He had not walked over a pentiad pair of parsecs from his asilium, when at the turning of the Shinshone Lateran, near St. Bowry's without his walls, he came, secunding to the 1/1/1 of the prophecies, amnis limina permanent, upon the most unconsciously boggy-looking stream he ever locked his eyes with. Out of the colleens it took a rise by daubing itself Inon. It looked little, and it smelt of brown, and it thought in narrows, and it talked so shallow. And as it ran, it dribbled like any lively pearl at easy. My, me and me, little down dream, don't I love thee? And I declare, what was there on the yonder bank of the stream that would be a river, parched on a limb of the Oldham, bolt downright, but the Gripes? And no doubt he was fit to be dried, for why had he not been having the juice of his times? His pips had been neatly all drowned on him. His pulps were charging odors every older minute. He was quickly forgetting the dresser's disdain on the fry leaf of his fronds, and he was quietly forgiving the bailiff's distrain onto the boat side of his cool de pompe. In all his specious heavings, as belived by Optimus Maximus, the Mookse had never seen his dub-billed brooder on low so nigh to a pickle. Adrian, That was the Mookse's now Assumption gnome, stuck still fizz-a-fizz to the gripes in an accessative ordination. But all Mookse must mood end, much as all routes Osterways or Wasters ways in roaming run through room. I am Rarumominum, blessed to see you, my dear Mooster. Will you not perhaps tell me everything, if you are pleased, Sanity? All about all and Lithium and all in all, about Orn and Lysius, nay? Think of it, O miserentissimus redemptor, a gripes. Rats, bellowed Mookse most telustrously. The conchinator and the sissimuses and the zosimuses in their robin houses quailed to hear his tardy noise at all, for you cannot wake a silken noose out of a horse oar. Blast yourself and your anathemy, inferioribus. No, hang you for an animal rural. I am superbly in my supremest pontiff. Abase you, baldy queens. Gather behind me, say traps. Rots. Now they have a long, intricate theological argument, and this concludes in this way. And they Viterberated each other, canis et colubere, with the wildest ever wielded, since Tariestinus last Piscispaltium. Unicorn, ungulant, uvuloid, whiskey beak, and bully folly answered volleyball. Now the little sister. Nuvoletta in her light dress, spun of sistine shimmers, was looking down on them, leaning over the banisters, and listening all she childishly could. How she was brightened when Schuldrups in his glaubring hochskied his welcome stuck, and how she was overclused when Niesnobs in his swivel was make-acting such a pulp of himself. She was alone. All her nubied companions were sleeping with the squirrels. Their miver, Mrs. Moonen, was off in the first quarter, scrubbing the back steps of number 28. Bubba, that scanned, was up in Norwood sofa parlor, eating oceans of Voking's blemish. Nuvoletta listened as she reflected herself, though the heavenly one with his constellatria and his emanation stood between, and she tried to make the Mookse look up at her. But he was far too adaptatiously far-seeing, and to make the gripes hear how coy she could be, though he was much too systematically auricular about his ends to heed her. But it was all mild vapor moist. Not even her faint reflection, Nuvolucia, could they choke their noses off, for their minds with intrepid fate and bungless curiosity were conclaved with Heliogabalus and Commodus and Enobarbarus, and whatever the coordinal dickens they did in their damn brow of papers and bookstaves said, as if that was their spiration, as if theirs could duiperate her queendom, as if she would be third party to search on search proceedings. She tried all the winsome wonsome ways her four winds had taught her. She tossed her sfumastillationless hair like the princesse de la petite Bretagne, and she rounded her minion's arms like Mrs. Cornwallis West, and she smiled over herself like the beauty of the image proposed of the daughter of the Queen of the Emperor of Ireland, and she sighed after herself as were she born to bride with Tristis Tristior Tristissimus. But, sweet Madonine, she might fair as well have carried her daisy's worth to Florida, for the Mookse, a dog-mad aconite, were not amused, and the gripes, a doubly boozed Catholic, was painfully obliviscent. I see, she sighed, there are manner. The sis of the whisp of the sigh of the soft sing of the stir of the bare growth, so arundo of a long one in medias reeds, and shades began to glitter along the banks, greepsing dusk unto dusk, and it was as glooming could be in the waste of all peaceable worlds. Metamnesia was also known chloroform brune, Cytherios bian and oland, inemeris and numeros. The Mookse had a sound eyes right, but he could not all hear. The gripes had light ears left, yet he could but ill see. He ceased, tongue and trit, and it was never so ever so dusk of both of them. But still who thought of the deeps of the unks he would profound come the Morocks, and still dry field of the scribes he would escape if by Grice he had luckanoops. Oh, how it was dusk! From Valley Maria to Gracia Plania, dormimus echo. Adieu, adieu. It was so dusk that the tears of night began to fall, first by ones and twos, then by threes and fours, at last by fives and sixes of sevens, for the tired ones were waking, as we weep now with them. Oh, par la pluie. Then they came down to the hither bank, a woman of no appearance. I believe she was a black with chills at her feet, and she gathered up his horiness the Mookse metamorphally where he was spread, and carried him away to her invisible dwelling, that heights Aquila Pax, for he was the holy sacred Solomon puppet spit of a bishop's apron. So you see how the Mookse he had reason, as I knew, and you knew, and he knew all along. And there came down to the hither bank a woman too all important, though they say that she was comely spite the cold in her head. And for he was as like it as blow it to a hawker's hank, she picked down the gripes, torn plankety out the tone in Anjou from his limb, and carried away its beatitude with her to her unseen ceiling. It is de rore celi. And so the poor gripes got wrong, for that is always how a gripes is, always was, and will be. And it was never so thoughtful of either of them, and they were left now, and only elm tree and but a stone. Paul with Pietrus, Sieur but Saul, oh yes, and Nuvoletta, alas. The Nuvoletta reflected for the last time in her little long life, and she made up all her myriads of drifting minds in one. She cancelled all her engorgements, she climbed over the banished stars, she gave a childy, cloudy cry, nuée, nuée, a light dress fluttered, she was gone. And into the river that had been a stream, for 1,000 of tears had gone on her and come on her, and she was stout and struck on dancing, and her muddied name was Mrs. Liffey, there fell a tear, a single tear, the loveliest of all tears. I mean for those Cry-Love Fables fans who are keen on the pretty, commonplace sort of thing you meet by whole parads, for it was a leap tear. But the river tripped on her by and by, laughing as though her heart was brook. Why, way, oh, way, I so silly to be flowing, but I no canna stay. No applause, please. Fast. The Rome Scott Nattleshaker will go round your circulation in Dio Dorsis. Aliboy Major, I'll take your reactions in another place after themes. Nolan Brown, you may now leave the classroom. Joe, Peters, Fox. Well, I'll conclude with the very last page so that we'll get the sense of our having completed the circle. This is Anna Livia as the river going out to sea, leaving her husband, old Dublin, behind her. Yes, you're changing, son husband, and you're turning, I can feel you, for a daughter-wife from the hills again, Im la Maya, and she is coming, swimming in my hindmost, divil-taking on me tail. Just a whisk, brisk, sly, spry, spink, spank, sprint of a thing, there somewhere saltering, Saltarella come to her own. I pity your old self I was used to, now a younger's there. Try not to part. Be happy, dear ones. May I be wrong. For she'll be sweet for you as I was sweet when I came down out of me mother. My great blue bedroom, the air so quiet, scarce a cloud, in peace and silence. I could have stayed up there for always, only it's something fails us. First we feel, then we fall. And let her reign now if she likes, gently or strongly as she likes. Anyway, let her reign, for my time is come. I done me best when I was let, thinking always if I go, all goes. 100 cares, a tithe of troubles, and is there one who understands me? One in 1,000 of years of the nights. All me life I have been lived among them, but now they are becoming loathed to me. And I am loathing their little warm tricks, and loathing their mean cozy turns, and all the greedy gushes out of their small souls, and all the lazy leaks down over their brash bodies. How small it's all. And me letting on to myself always, and lilting on all the time. I thought you were all glittering with the noblest of carriage. You're only a bumpkin. I thought you the great in all things, in guilt and in glory. You're but a puny. Home. My people were not their sort, out beyond there, so far as I can. For all the bold and bad and bleary they are blamed, the sea hags. No, not for all our wild dances in all their wild din. I can see myself among them, Al Anuvia Plurabelle. How she was handsome, the wild Amasia, when she would seize to my other breast. And what is she weird, naughty Niluna, that she will snatch from my honest hair? For 'tis they are the stormies, ho hang, hang ho, and the clash of our cries till we spring to be free. Or of old, they says, never heed of your name, but I'm loathing them that's here, and all I loathe, lonely in me loneliness, for all their faults. I'm passing out. Oh, bitter ending. I'll slip away before they're up. They'll never see, nor know, nor miss me. And it's old, and old, it's sad, and old, it's sad, and weary I go back to you, my cold father, my cold, mad father, my cold, mad, fiery father, till the near sight of the mere size of him, the moils and moils of it, moan and owning, makes me see silt, salt, sick, and I rush my only into your arms. I see them rising. Save me from those terrible prongs. 2 more. 1, 2 Mormons more. So, Ave Laval. My leaves have drifted from me. all, but one clings still. I'll bear it on me, to remind me of Liff. So soft this morning hours, yes. Carry me along, Tally, like you done through the toy fair. If I seen him bearing down on me under white spread wings like he'd come from archangels, I think I'd die down over his feet, humbly dumbly, only to wash up. Yes, tid, there's where, first, we passed through the grass we hushed the bush to, whish, a gull, gulls, far calls, coming, far, end here. Us then, Finnegan, take, but softly, me, more me, till thou sends thee, oops, the keys to, given, away, alone, a last, a loved, along the river run, past even Adam, from swerve short bend to
I want to thank Mr. Campbell on my behalf and on yours for the very important and impressive lesson that he has given us in Finnegan's Wake. We will all read Finnegan's Wake with more clearness in future. All these patterns overlaid on each other, Mr. Campbell has distinguished and brought out for us, and also the very fact that he has read it means so much to us, because of course Finnegan's Wake is an oral book. It's something to be read aloud. It's something to be said aloud. As Mr. Campbell was reading it, I thought Joyce has done something. He's done a great many things that are so different from any other author. But one of the things he has done is to give us sentences that we carry in our minds. The way a nursery tale stays in our minds. Strange sentences that we can think over and hold in our memories, like lonely in my loneliness and carry me, Tad, as you did at the toy fair. All that sort of things accompanies our thoughts. I don't know any literature in which that has been done since the old nursery tales, as it has been done in Finnegan's Wake.
Well, you know, or don't you ken it, or haven't I told you, every telling has a tailing, and that's the he and the she of it. Look, the dusk is growing. My branches lofty are taking root, and my cold chair's gone ashly. Feeloo. What age is that? It soon is late. 'Tis endless now since I or one last saw Waterhouse's clock. They took it asunder, I heard them sigh. When will they reassemble it? Oh, my back. I'd want to go to Aix-les Paynes. Ping, pang, there's the bell for sexolitis at Concepta de Spray. Pang. Ring out the clothes, ring in the dew. God avari vert the showers and grant thy your grace. Amen. Will we spread them here now? Aye, we will. Spread on your bank, and I'll spread mine on mine. Flap. It's what I'm doing, spread. It's churning chill, their went is rising. I'll lay a few stones on the hostel sheets, a man and his bride embrace between them, else I'd have folded and sprinkled them only. And I'll tie my butcher's apron here, it's suety yet, the strollers will pass it by. 6 shifts, 10 kerchiefs, 9 to hold to the fire, and 1 for the code, the convent napkins 12, 1 baby shawl. Good Mother Joseph? No, she said. Who said? Mother snores, they attach us. Where now are all her children, say? In kingdom gone, or power to come, or glory be to them, Father? All alluvial, all alluvial. Some here, more no more. More again lost and a stranger. I've heard tell that same brooch of the Shannons was married into a family in Spain, and all the dunders do done in Martland's Vineland beyond Brendan's herring pool takes number 9 in Yankee's hats. And one of Biddy's beads went bobbing till it rounded up lost history with a marigold and a cobbler's candle in a side strain of a main drain of a man's in a hurry's off bachelor's walk. But all that is left to the lost of the Mars, in the loop of the ears, prefixed in between, is 1 knee buckle and 2 hoops in the front. Do you tell me that now? I do in troth. Or rara pro orbis et pur las animas. Usa ulla, we're umbas all. Misha, didn't you hear it a deluge of times? Over and over, respond to spond. You did, I need. It's that ear of wadding I've stuck in my arse. It all but husheth and leaveth sound. Oh, Runoko, what's your trouble? Is that the great Finn leader himself, in his joy kimono, on his statue riding the high horse there for Hengist? Father of authors, it is himself. Beyond there, is it that? On Fallerine Common, you're thinking of Astley's amphitheatre, where the bobby restrained you making sugar-stuck pouts to the ghost white horse of the peppers. Throw the cobwebs from your eyes, woman, and spread your washing proper. It's well I know your sort of slop. Ireland sober as Ireland stiff. Lord, help you, Maria, full of grease, the Lord is with me. Your prayers. Aye, Santo, Madam Angot. Why you lifting your elbow till us glazy cheeks in Conway's Carrigacorrad canteen? Was I what hobbledy hips? Flop. Your rear gates creak o' Roman, but your butts disagree. Haven't I up since the damp dawn, martyred Mary, all a cook, with Corrigan's pulse and varicose veins, my pram axle smashed, Alice Jane in decline, and my one-eyed mongrel twice run over, soaking and bleaching boiler rags, and sweating cold, a widow like me, for to deck my tennis champion son, the laundryman with the lavender flannels. You won your limp-up-all limp from the husky hussars, when collars and cuffs was heir to the town, and your slur gave the stink to Carlo. Holy scamander, I saw it again, near the Golden Falls. Ice is on us, sense of light. Is there? Subdue your noise, you humble creature. What is it but a blackberry growth? Or that dwyer grey ass and 4 old codger's owns? Are you meaning Tarpey and Lyons and Gregory? I mean now thank all the 4 of them, and the roar of them, that draves that stray in the mist, and old Johnny MacDougall along with them. Is that the pool-beg flasher beyond? Far, far? Or a fireboat coasting nigher the Kishna, or a glow I behold within a hedge, or my Gary come back from the Indies? Wait till the honeying of the loon, love. Die, Eve, little Eve, die. We see that wonder in your eye. We'll meet again, we'll part once more. The spot I'll seek if the hour you'll find. My chart shines high where the blue milk's upset. Forgive me quick, I'm going, go-bye. And you pluck your watch, forget me not, your even load, so saved to journey's end. My sights are swimming thicker on me by the shadows to this place. I so home slowly now by own way, my valley way, towy I too, Rathmine. Ah, but she was the queer old scousha toes, and sure he was the queer old bunce too, dear dirty dumpling, who's their father of Fingalls and Dothergills. Gaffer and Gammer were all their gangsters. Hadn't he 7 dams to wive him, and every dam had her 7 crutches, and every crutch had its 7 hues, and each hue had a differing cry, suds for me and supper for you, and the doctor's bill for Joe John. Before, he married his markets cheap by foul, I know, like any Etrurian Catholic heathen, in their pinky, lemony, creamy burnies and their Turkish Indian moulds, but at milked mass who was the spouse? Then all that was fair, 'tis elven land, teams of times and happy returns, the same anew. Ordo Vico or Viricordo, Anna was, Livia is, Plurabelle's to be. Northmen's thing made South folks place, but how multiplurators make each one in person, Latin me that, me Trinity scholard, out of your Sanskrit into our Aryan. Hircus civis eblanensis, he had buck-coat paps on him, soft ones, for orphans. Oh, Lord, twins of his bosom, Lord save us. And ho, hey, what all men, hot, his tittering daughters of, walk, can't hear what the waters of, the chittering waters of, flittering bats, field mice, balk, talk. Ho, are you not gone a home? What Tom Malone? can't hear with bark of bats all the Liffeying waters of. Oh, talk save us, my goose won't moose. I feel as old as yonder elm, a tale told of Sean or Shem, all Livia's daughter sons. Dark hawks hear us, my whole head falls. I feel as heavy as yonder stone. Tell me of Sean or Sean. Who were Shem and Sean, the living sons and daughters of? Night now, tell me, elm. Night, night, tell me tale of stem or stone, beside the rivering waters of, hither and thithering waters of, night.
Yes.
Well,
Will Dr. Schwartz do that for us now?
I just wanted, this is a bit of a chat, you see,
I wish
about
you
the
would
book
give it
that I
to us.
bought. And
Dr. Schwartz.
first I would like to give some impressions I had of Joyce. I'm afraid some of them may pain you see.
Well,
But
you
you
stand
don't
up
mind
there,
it, do you?
Dr. Schwartz, will you stand up?
You're an Irishman, you're like a quarrel.
I do not.
Oh, I thought you
Go
do.
on, go right on. Quarrel with the others, you won't quarrel with me.
I don't want to quarrel with anybody. I want to have some fun.
Go right
I want to
on.
have some fun. Because this isn't for the student, this is just for the ordinary person that has an interest in Joyce. And it may amuse some people. Fortunately, I did spend a month or so with Joyce in London, in 29, I think it was. And I remembered a few things he told me and a few things that I observed. Of course, this gentleman here knows him almost from the cradle. But this is the few words I have to say. As a young man, Joyce considered himself a socialist anarchist, influenced by the only writer of politics he read seriously, and that was an American anarchist called Ben Tucker. He said, oh, he was the great political thinker. Tolstoy was another of his favorites. Well, naturally, these writers were fundamentally personal. The social and the industrial scene was a minor affair. In Dubliners, there is a character called Mr. Duffy in A Painful Case. A good bit of the story must be autobiographical, because one of the books in his little library there was Michael Kramer of Hauptmann. And of course, as you know, he translated Michael Kramer. Joyce did. Well, Mr. Duffy attends a socialist meeting, but he leaves in the midst of it quite disgusted with a Marxian cry of more material things for the workers. He said it was too much harping on the physical for his taste. Another interesting point, Joyce told me that most of the stories of Dubliners were completed before his 20th year. His 20th year. Really, the stories of a very young man, because in 1905 he practically had all of them completed for his publisher and was only 23 then. When you realize that they're the stories of a boy of 20, they become tremendous achievements for so young a boy. Well, his first article for the Italian papers when he landed in Trieste in the early 20s were political subjects of the Irish question. It was a flirtation with the subject of politics, just as he flirted with theosophy in his youth. He almost became one of the followers of George Russell and that little hermetic crowd. Well, most of his fellow pals believed it was a leg pull, and Russell, as you know, was glad almost to get rid of him. Well, later on, you see, both socialism and higher thought are mercilessly lampooned in Ulysses. What Joyce's fundamental faith is, I don't know. Recently, as I just returned from London, there was a symposium of almost a score of people, and that was the question they all wanted to know. What was the faith? What was the fundamental faith? What did he really believe in? Well, his sister, who was very religious, believed that he sought God all of his life. Those that were irreligious said he had nothing to do with God. Well, fundamentally, I don't know what his faith was, but I do feel that he believed in himself as no human being I've ever met. And absolutely self-confidence and equanimity in the face of the world, contempt or
Scorn, rather.
Scorn, complete scorn. They thought that this Finnegan's Wake, the gentleman just read, was a huge leg pull. He continually repeated it. These people think I'm not serious. And that hurt him most deeply, that his work was not serious. If he didn't understand the work, it did not matter. I and Griffith, you know Griffith, the ex-journalist, the journalist of London, a friend of his, also went to school. We went to see Harold Munro in the poetry bookshop. And because he was a friend of Eliot, you see. And he says, what do you think of my last chapter just published by Faber and Faber, in one of the Criterion Miscellanies? He says, Mr. Joyce, I tried to read that book. I've spent hours reading this book. I couldn't make head or tail of it. But a friend of mine, a psychoanalyst, who's a great friend of Joyce, of Mr. Jung, he says, I've been reading the book the wrong way. That should be read from the back forwards. Well, so I thought I'd take a chance. I read it from the back forwards. And to me, it's just as unintelligible, one way or the other. So, we left, and Joyce didn't lose his temper at all. He walked out, and he told me, Griffith, he said, I admire that man, Mr. Harold Munro. He read that book. I think it's first-class criticism. At least he doesn't believe this thing is a huge joke. Back to a few of the bits of autobiography. Well, I doubt if he ever seriously considered himself a member of society. Of course, he never voted. He never took any interest in the community he lived in. Never joined any civic movement or any particular society. When Yeats and Shaw created the new Irish Academy of Letters and made a direct and rather passionate appeal to Joyce that he become its first distinguished member, he politely but firmly refused. Well, this rather shocked and pained Yeats, but his fundamental anarchistic stand could not be budged. Joyce was hardly attached to anyone, not seriously. Joyce asked me when I went to Dublin to go and visit his father, the famous Simon Dedalus, in the Padraic. Well, I did. He lived in the top bed in the top room of on a pitiful small state pension. Well, he was bedridden, and every few hours, lady upstairs would come and hand him some bowl of mush. Well, I said, what do you think of this stuff? And of course he said, this is terrible, terrible. That was his usual word. Everything was terrible. I says, well, why don't you move to a better place? Well, he says, I have no money, very little money. He says, in fact, I've had my friends, my old cronies, write to Jimmy in Paris. I says, please send me a little more money. I want to get out of this dump. Joyce never answered. And my private belief is that if Joyce put him in a castle, he would still complain. It didn't make much difference. But anyway, he left him there. Now, he thumbed a few old postal cards, Christmas postal cards. Every Christmas, Joyce would send him a card. He revered these cards, and laying on a small table next to his bed. So he says to me, will you tell Jimmy to please write me a little more frequently? He says, only sends me one card a year. You know, that isn't much. Well, I said I would try, but I dropped the matter. Now, of course, as you know, this is trite. Joyce lived primarily in his own dream world. Ulysses was criticized as a personal document. And of course, it took 20 years, perhaps, for people to realize that he did for Dublin what T.S. Eliot did for modern London and Baudelaire did for Paris. He really put Dublin on the map. Now, but this obscurity was nothing compared to the time when, all right, now, when the chapters of Work in Progress appeared in Paris, even the little smart boys around the Café Dome and Shakespeare and Company, they were stumped, absolutely stumped. Well, so Beach approached Joyce and said, why don't you give some nice private readings in the back of your bookshop, like this one here, to explain Finnegan's Wake? So he said, that's a good idea, and meetings were held, a number of meetings were held in the back of Sylvia Beach's bookshop, as in this bookshop, in the year 28. Well, in 29 appeared the book called The Examination, with contributions by Beckett, Gilbert, Eliot Paul, Mick Elman, and others. Well, these were the star pupils in the back of that Shakespeare bookshop. Well, anyway, these essays and dithyrambics and polemics were intended to pave the way for the ignorant and the unenlightened. There were 2 letters in the back of the book. I believe the most amusing part of the book. One is signed G.B. Slingsby, and the other one is signed Vladimir Dixon. And the letters commenced for explanation. And the introduction read this way: Mr. Shames Joyce. Shames Joyce. And of course these 2 letters were written by James Joyce in a mood of high spirits and gaiety. Now, when I spent the summer with Joyce in Torquay, he invited Mrs. Weaver and myself to a private reading on the hotel lawn of the chapter De Mookse and the Gripes. Well, he went into the details of the dogmas and the manifestos, the orthodoxies and the iconoclasms of the Pope and the Patriarch. Everything in the book was crystal clear to him. All the darker sides of consciousness, the gropings of the somnolent, the states between sleeping and waking, the brimming over with the ad-libs, and all the misplaced confidences. But he gave us an outline of the whole book. In an afternoon he skipped through the history of the human race and most of its myths. The language was of one who wore 7-league boots. Well, the strangest feature of this dream is that it completely lacks visual imagery. It was all of the mind's ear. It was no more easier for me to visualize a Mookse or a Gripes than to gather a clear-cut impression of a Slizy Tove or a Momrat. Well, as he says, it was cultivated with a meticulosity bordering on the insane. That never perfect, over-planned book. I remember that he gave 36 parallels to the Mookse and the Gripes, and humorously added that if he had more time he could continue ad infinitum. It all seemed to me like a brilliant academic word game. And in my opinion, it lacked all human feeling and all spontaneity. Well, when this was completed after 17 years of incessant labor, in one of the letters to Rutger, he says that the words were squeezed out like drops of blood. The book was a white elephant. Of course, as you know, less than 100 copies were sold in the first month, and the signed edition took over 10 years to liquidate. Joyce was very deeply affected by this complete lack of interest. I remember reading a package full of reviews of the former chapters. I think it was Shem and Sean. I used to do the review reading. Big packs would come, big packs of the reviews of his books. Because just about that time, I think it was Shem and Sean that appeared. Well, I remember reading a package full of them. Well, Joyce listened with that usual air of aloofness and hauteur. His head thrown back this way. Well, all of them were damning, every one of them. But he listened, and then he listened to the usual arguments. These great professors pitying the writer for this amount of time wasted, and so forth. After a time, he sort of woke from a half-sleep, and he said, "You know, I'll give those literary birds something to chirp about for the next 300 or 400 years before they catch up with me." "Well, what do you mean?" I asked. "Well, is Dante, Shakespeare, is he understood after all these years?" He absolutely had self-confidence in himself. Well, Miss Weaver was given the manuscript as a present. Well, I saw this manuscript in Oxford a year ago. It was contained in a huge black leather trunk, where the corrected proofs consisted of over 12,000 pages. She told me there were 12,000 pages in the original manuscript. And was, God knows, double it was 5 feet high, you see. It had a mass of rejected material, unpublished material, and so forth. Well, it was clear that Joyce lived to write, and it would write with an almost paranoid disregard of any reader. I asked her, "What are you going to do with this manuscript? Read it, or study it, or revive it?" She said, "I haven't got the brains to do that. I'm going to give it to his old college in Dublin." Now the trouble will come in. So she says, I think it belongs there. It belongs. That manuscript belongs there, you see. Well, I told her that Joyce loathed the place, and that it would serve a much better purpose in the British Museum or the National Library of Dublin. Well, a few months previously, I was in Dublin and went to the University College. That's the school we went to. Well, I examined the card index under Joyce. I took a very careful look at that card index. Under Joyce. Now he's laughing, he knows what's coming. I examined it. And there was only one item under the head of Joyce. One single item. It was a 25-cent edition of Penny Pennyage. Poems Pennyage. Nothing else in that library for anybody to read. Well, I thought this was a mistake. Such a huge library, such a great. The home, you see, of Mr. Joyce. 1 shilling edition is all that you can read if you think he's a great writer. You go there and see. What is there to see? One little book. I said I must be mistaken, so I asked the assistant library, come over here. Do you hide the Joyce? You can burn the Joyce. So where is the Joyce? He says, I'm sorry, but that's all we have of Joyce. That's very all. Whereas the National Library and Trinity College have copies of everything Joyce ever wrote. You see. Well, so it is. Then, when I met Stanislav Joyce later in Trieste, well, I told him, very innocently, that Miss Weaver thinks of donating this masterpiece Finnegan's works to the University College. Who immediately replied, "Oh," he says, "the Jesuits, they'll burn it, they'll bury it." Well, luckily, Miss Weaver has just bequeathed the manuscript to the British Museum.
Oh, no.
She did? I read it. Absolutely. And the Coleridge manuscripts the very same day. They're in the British Museum right now.
Oh, they shouldn't be. They should be.
Oh, well, that's your point of view, and that is my point of view. It's her stuff. You ought to reconvert her. I don't know. I don't know why she did, but there it is.
Is it done?
It is in the British Museum. I hear she will give the manuscript of the portrait of the artist to that university. It is in her will. She has the manuscript of the portrait of the artist.
Well, what I want to see is
That is
Dublin
the-
reading Finnegan's Wake.
Who?
I want to see Dublin reading Finnegan's Wake.
Well, there it is. They'll have to take a trip to London. Well, my first meeting with Harriet Weaver was in London. She was the head of the Egoist Press, which published the work of Richard Darlington, Eliot, Joyce, Flint, and so forth. Well, she had a small office in Bloomsbury, known as Oakley House. Well, I had tea with her, and she is one of the most amazing women. Frequently, Stuart Gilbert tells me, why do these American professors write so many books on Joyce? There's a far more exciting person in the background of which no one knows anything. Why doesn't someone write a book of Harriet Weaver? Well, I said, I don't know. She is an amazing woman, and she enters the scene now. She is a very quiet Quaker person, and even for a Quaker, of the utmost asceticism and simplicity. Well, as you know, she published, her magazine was The Egoist, she backed it. And through Ezra Pound, she published a serial of the portrait of the artist. When the book was finished, she took that manuscript under her hand. She still owns the manuscript, and that is going to Dublin, to the University College. She still has that. She took that manuscript, she says, to 23 different printers. You must remember it was the war years, 23 different printers. And they all said, we will not publish this book. Too many scatological words in this book. Well, she never met Joyce personally, but she communicated with him through the publication. And Ezra Pound did know her. And she was a great admirer of Ezra Pound. In fact, everybody in London in the 20s loved Ezra Pound. He was so youthful, he was so exciting, he was so full of zest and raciness. Anyway, she fell for him. She liked him very much. Through Pound, she learned about the continued financial difficulties and the semi-blindness and the need of expensive medical treatments for Joyce. So in 1917, she sent him a regular monthly allowances. And a few months later, a substantial sum of money was transferred outright to Joyce. She didn't want this thing to appear as charity. The money was his. Well, Joyce frequently regretted that he didn't give her the manuscript of Ulysses as a present. But he did sell it in 1921 to Mr. John Quinn, the American lawyer. Well, Joyce told me that Quinn was a great collector and a very shrewd man. Anyway, he was Joyce's unpaid lawyer through the years during the suppression of Ulysses. And previous to that, Joyce tells me, he sent him a substantial check to have a set of teeth made. As you know, Joyce's teeth were very, very poor. As a young man, he had no money for dentistry. And by the time he was 40, he had no teeth. And which he had were all decayed stumps. And Quinn was absolutely certain, Mookse. Quinn was absolutely certain that the semi-blindness and a lot of the trouble of the teeth was due to a focal infection in the jaw. And he may have been right, you know. He had very bad teeth, and he fixed his teeth up. Well, anyway, now we come back to Harriet Weaver. Now, I asked Joyce, how comes it that none of your books have a dedication? None of the books are dedicated to anybody or anything. Well, he says, I'll only dedicate a book if that particular person is the source of the inspiration of this particular work, or any particular work I write. Since no one has been the source of the inspiration except myself, they remain undedicated. Well, I always feel that poor Harriet Weaver, you see, who has worked for so many years, over 25 years, to maintain Joyce, it would have been a small favor, just as Eliot did, to dedicate something to her. Because in a way, she almost saved his life. Well, anyway, Joyce was singularly fortunate with women, very fortunate. You know, he never was a Romeo, and yet women always helped him in wonderful ways. It is a small list of it. Weaver published his portrait. Marian Anderson publishes Ulysses in the Little Review. Beach publishes poems pen each examination to Ulysses and so forth, collected poems. Madame Monnier published a French edition of his work. Ludmilla Savitsky translated Dubliners into French. Duc Pasquier translated Dublin. Savitsky translated the portrait. Duc Pasquier translated Dubliners into French. Charlotte Sowerman introduced him to Mrs. Harold McCormick Rockefeller, who supported Joyce for quite a time in Zurich. Caroline Gideon Welker was the first person to translate Finnegan's Wake into German, mark you, into German. Mrs. Jonas of Transition did a lot of work for Joyce, and right now, right here, dear Miss Stella, keeps this ball still rolling. Well, Joyce's humor was of the driest. And I've seen innumerable photographs of that man, but I've never seen one with a smile. I've never seen one with a smile. Well, as you know, he was utterly unassertive. He was an unassuming man, and he had a genius for inconspicuousness. A real genius. Of course, he never tried to be brilliant. I never heard him say a brilliant word. He said shrewd things, many shrewd things, but never a brilliant word. Well, one always felt that the only thing that mattered to him was his work. Even during conversation, the most intimate things, he had that look of abstraction about him, you see. His whole life was centered around his mind. Yeah, and Brancusi was dead right when he made the portrait of Joyce, just an internal ear. But of course he could turn the ear off when he wanted to. That's another matter. Well, he hardly took any notice of nature whatsoever. He couldn't. Well, I know, and that's as bad as all that. Not as bad as all that. We spent a month in Torquay, one of the most beautiful parts of Devon. Well, he never went sightseeing. Didn't care for sights. Cared nothing whatever about the architectural beauties of a country, and hardly noticed right in front of him birds or flowers or animals. I never heard him talk about a flower in my life. Never seen it. Not interested. But he never thought of sea bathing. That would be hell to put him into that sea, and the hotel was right there on the water. Nothing for me. He'd never think of going sea bathing. Well, he was courtesy. He was absolute courtesy and tenderness itself to any of the help in the hotel, and the most considerate of old people and children, and as democratic as one could wish. He would stop a porter in the hall and ask him the most complicated political question, what he thought of the king and the premier and world affairs. I always thought he was pulling their feet, you see. But, and the and is, he always tipped like a millionaire. Yes. I've never seen a man give such tips in my life. I'll give you an example. Well, he hardly cared whether the tip was 1 shilling or 10 shillings. Didn't make any difference. He gave the first piece of money he put his hand on in his pocket. But he never took any change of coins. I never seen him take any change. You keep it. Never took any change of coins or bills. Well, he never knew or cared what his bank balance is. Never heard him talk about bank balance of money or anything at all. Well, I believe it was indifference. Well, of course, this was in 1929 with Weaver behind him. But although I heard that he was just as indifferent with money, when he got a pile of it, as you know, in the portrait, he went out and got drunk and spent it in one day. That he was really indifferent to money in his youth. Well, I don't know. But I do know he loathed dogs. He loathed dogs. If anything he hated was a dog. He loathed dogs and would go pale if one jumped on his knee, as they were wont to do in a big hotel. with a patch of hair on his chin covered a hole that a mad dog tore out when he was a child, when he was a small boy. And ever since he was terrified of the breed, terrified of it. Whereas kittens he loved. I saw him make all sorts of careful moves and gestures not to awaken a kitten that had fallen asleep on his knees. But there was a summer stock company there at Torquay, run by one of his old friends, Mr. Fay. You see, London, one of the great Abbey people. And he went regularly to the theatre every week, once a week. He saw all the shows. Well, I used to go and I sat down there with him through all this sort of tripe written by Philpotts and so forth. And I once asked him, how could you endure such rot? So he says, well, he said his tastes were most simple. He said his taste was simple and ordinary, and he didn't expect much from the play. Well, the fact is, he never listened to the play at all. He would again lean way back, be half asleep, and simply dream of Earwaker. There's no question about that. Well, after the show, he would come back to the hotel and he would order his usual white bottle of wine. He never drank in the afternoon, he hardly drank at night. All the stories of his brother Stanislav, his man was a drunkard. I don't know anything about it, but I've never seen him drunk, but I know he would very quietly drink white wine. Red wine he thought was squash beef steak. That was for the proletariat. It was ugly and disgusting to him. I think any mention of thought or colour of blood. Well, anyway, this bottle of white wine, he would stare at the glass and occasionally quietly hum a tune. And his favourite tune, I've heard it hundreds of times, was the Londonderry air. Whenever he was pleased, he would hum this Londonderry air. Well, still abstracted after the show, he would ask the most seemingly useless questions. Did I notice that the woman in the next box to me wore a blue dress? Well, did I notice it? Well, I did, but what is it? He says, isn't that funny? I've been thinking about blue all morning. Well, he had a habit of seeing and making something mystical in everything that he ever encountered. Mysticism was his big subject, you see, endlessly. Well, for years this thing plagued him. He says, how comes it that the initials of George Roberts of Monsell and Company, and those of Grant Richards, of Grant Richard himself, how comes it that both these people that turned down Dubliners have the same bloody initials? There must be something. This is almost a conspiracy. I don't understand it, but it must be terrible. I'd like to figure it out. I can't. What do you think of it? I said, I don't understand it. But then I met James Stephens, and James Stephens can tell stories about this man's fantastic mystical unity. Well, James Stephens, we met James Stephens years ago in Dublin. They didn't like each other at all. Years later, one morning, a blind man, literally a knock at the door of Stephens, and the housekeeper comes up to his flat and he says, there's a blind man downstairs, very anxious to meet you, very anxious. This happened to be about 4 a.m. in the morning. Well, he said, I don't know any blind men. What does it do? Let him wait. He says, no, the man won't wait. Well, he came down, and he says he made a great discovery. A great discovery, you see. And this is the discovery, you see, that James Stephens was his mystical brother. His mystical brother, because his name was the same as the hero of the Portrait of the Odyssey young man. And more than that, he doped the whole thing out. Blavatsky had nothing on this. He said, I found out we were born in the same day, the same town, the same year, the same everything, the same moment. We were both created. So, what do you think of that? The same moment. That makes us spiritual twins. And from now on, I'm your devoted friend. Yes. Well, Stephens, he says, was a bit annoyed with all this claptrap, you see, about spiritual twins. And up to his death, he believed in it, you know. Joyce believed in it, and nothing could dissuade him. His friends all laughed at him, but he's absolutely adamant this mystical stuff had him. Incidentally, James Joyce was the only outsider of the family that he ever called by his first name, Jimmy. He may have called you, I don't know. But as you know, he was very reserved. He called nobody. But this man, James Joyce, was Jimmy to him. Well, now, here's a story. After 20 years of closest friendship with Gilbert Stuart, Stuart Gilbert. After 20 years collaborating with him, seeing him almost every day, over the telephone, he would never call him by his first name. but always repeat is Stuart Gilbert, Gilbert Stuarton. And Stuart told me, he says, that's nothing. He says, you know that man, Mr. Jolas? He works like a devil for him, day and night. And up to his death, he would call him Mr. Jolas over the telephone. Nothing less, only Mr. Jolas. He wasn't an easy man to become familiar with. Well, no question about that. Well, Gilbert tells me that when correcting a chapter of Ulysses for the revised edition in 1933, he came across a half a dozen misprints. He thought they were misprints. And he was on the verge of correcting.
Correcting what?
What?
What book was he correcting?
The Ulysses again.
Oh yes, I thought you were going to tell me he was correcting Finnegan's Wake.
No, Ulysses. You know, the final edition was about 1933. We come to that. There's always something wrong in the spelling. He thought, outsiders thought the spelling was wrong. Who knows? Anyway, he came across a half a dozen misprints and was on the verge of correcting them when Joyce stopped him. Oh, they happened to be amusing misprints. He says, oh, keep him in. He says, I couldn't do any better. Leave him there. Still, that was all right if he passed the misprints. But woe betide the proofreaders, you see. The proofreaders' misprints was another matter. He always had his way, and he did what he wanted, naturally. And contrary to common opinion, contrary to some opinion, that he was careless about the corrections. He was over-scrupulous about the thing. Well, he told me there were at least 3 proofs of Ulysses. And every time he sent back a proof corrected to the printer, the revised copy came back, and he says, you know, it was worse than the corrected copy of Sinatra. Where these fellas dig up all the mistakes, I don't know. But I think he was incorrect. What the real matter was that he spotted no misprints in this business. Well, the first 9 editions of Ulysses are corrected. 9 editions, there's something wrong with all of them. Because a few months after the first edition, there was quite a leaflet, you see. And then that leaflet was corrected of misprints, and it went down for 9 editions. And way up to about 1933, with the final edition done by the Odyssey Press, in collaboration with, under the supervision of Stuart Gilbert, you finally get the final edition, you see. Well, he says, always, it came back worse than ever. Well, the mystery is that the thing was ever done. I have the so-called final edition of the proofs here, and after we can all handle it, and you see I'd say thousands of corrections in this thing. And this thing was going on for about 2 years previously. It's just endless game, you see. Well, as you know, the covers of Ulysses are blue and white. Well, I knew they were the national colors of Greece, but he told me it goes further than that. Everything had more than one level, naturally. And he says, you know, those are the colors of the old Jewish Zion. Those are the colors of Israel. And this book symbolizes the meeting of the Greek with the Jew. And of course, in Finnegan's Wake, he ruefully calls this thing the useless blue book of Eccles. What he means is blue books are the guidebooks in Europe, or guidebook if a country is blue, you see. So he says, this is a useless guidebook of the printer, the ecclesiastic, the printer. So that was one of his jokes. He says, this thing really is a useless book. In some ways it is. You can't learn how to make a fortune, how to fall in love with this book. It's no guidebook to anything, is it? Well, what interests me as a Jew is that there were a good number of scraps of Hebrew throughout the book. Well, I knew he never studied Hebrew, whereas you know Synge was a great Hebrew scholar and majored in Hebrew, and Joyce didn't know any Hebrew, and he knew just a scattering of Gaelic. Of course, he set his face against Gaelic. He says, that's awful, you see. He wanted a large audience, he didn't want a small audience. Well, anyway, but we hope that this book will someday be translated into Gaelic. That's a good job for you.
I don't know not.
Well, it's a good job translated into Gaelic. Well, anyway, this is as the story runs on. This is the useless blue book of Eccles, the useless book of the preacher. Well, as Hebrew, there are scraps of Hebrew throughout this book. Well, I know he wasn't a Hebrew scholar, interested to know where and how he got his Hebrew information and knowledge. Well, it's hardly known that one of his pupils in English was a man called Cyril Glass. He was a very rich Jew, an aristocratic Jew, had a love for the old traditions, a love for, and a great believer in the Zion in those days, in the early days. He died in tragic circumstances a few years later. So, there's no doubt that the knowledge of Hebrew customs he got from the menage of Cyril Glass, who invited him frequently to his house for food and drinks and merriment. And he was very glad to go to this rich man's house.
Was it in Trieste?
In Trieste, Cyril Glass.
Yeah.
Mr. Roth told him, Mr. Roth, the Hebrew scholar, I never knew that before, Cyril Glass.
Yeah.
Because there was another Jew in that town, I met his wife only lately, and that's a fellow called Schmitz.
Yeah.
He wrote under the name of Svevo. That man was a Jew, but he was an atheist, he was impious, and he had nothing to do with the old traditions. Nevertheless, they say, so his knowledge of Hebrew he did get from Glass.
There were other people too.
What?
There were other people too, not in
I'm
Trieste.
coming to this. I'm coming to it. There's a joke about that. Well, you see, the other Jew in Trieste was Mr. Schmitz, Mr. Sveber, who was an unbeliever and a skeptic. There was no Hebrew ceremonies in this house. Well, originally, the character of Bloom was a man called Mr. Hunter. Anyway, on paper, he was the original Bloom, and he was a Gentile. But eventually, he was an amalgam of Glass, Svevo, and probably others. Well, I've met dozens of Jews in Dublin, including one of the famous pawnbroker, who in confidence tells me he's the original Bloom. Well, I don't know who Bloom is. He's probably an imaginative creature.
Well, yes.
Well, I'll never find him, you see. Well, Joyce both liked and was exasperated by the Jews. Religion was banned in the household. I've never heard him discuss religion at all. Well, he never went to church, but when he did, he occasionally did go to church. He would only go to the church and listen to the music. So I did go to Westminster Cathedral with him, and he was continually criticizing the music. Iron Griffiths and Lincoln. That's all he hardly, I don't know what he saw there, but the music got him. And he thought he criticized the music. Of course, he was a great lover of choral music, and he understood the old days very much. As you know, although his book has plenty of four-lettered Saxon words, he never uttered one. He never uttered even a mild damn. This is in 1929. School days is a different matter. He was what is called properly brought up, as you know, properly brought up. And these people can't utter an expletive. Well, his only term of damnation would be, what the ball, you see. When he spent hours on a telephone, I thought he'd break the telephone receiver. There he was, a cold, self-centered person, under control, his impulses under command. What the ball. But his brother Stanislav told me that only once in his career did he know him to be upset. Only once in his career was he upset. When he heard of the murder of his schoolboy pal, the mayor of Limerick,
Yes.
who was shot and killed on his own stairway. He says for days, for weeks, he was a mass of nerves. He couldn't get over it. Now another characteristic of Joyce. You know, he preferred to believe gossip to any independent, thoughtful investigation. Right or wrong, you'll see. You know, he believed things that people told him. Now, I saw some tragic examples of it with Budgeon, you see. He didn't speak to him for years. Well, he preferred to believe gossip to any independent investigation. And, you see, he would accept almost any silly story against a very intimate friend. He'd accept the story, and then the friend, of course, would not hear from him for months, would write letters and never receive any reply. Almost any silly story, he'd believe it. Well, Budgeon told me for 7 years. He was a great friend of his, great pals in Zurich. He'd never heard a word from him. And then one day he went to Paris to visit him again. But Joyce, you see, Joyce would watch him, he says, would watch him and say, and wondered if he'd make any apology for the things he did. For the apology or an excuse for the things he did also. But if there's no excuse, he realized that he was foolish in accepting another man's rumor, and then the friendship would start from the very point that it broke. But I've known that he broke all sorts of friendships, believing any tomfool story told him. Here is a very interesting story. In 1937, he delivered the only speech. I wasn't there. At the Penn Club, he accepted the honor of the speech because the Penn Club were fighting so much. Mr. Gould's just dead, the president, against the suppression of Ulysses and about the copyright, you see. Of course it wasn't copyright. So he said, I will say a few words of thanks. He did say a few words of thanks. And a number of Irishmen were invited by him to the Irish table, you see, the different nationalities, all the nationalities of writers. And he told his friend, make sure you bring me a blood pudding, see? Because the blood pudding reminded him of the school days. This fellow brought the blood pudding, he was very happy. Well, they had a good time there. But after the party, and after this thing, 3 or 4 of them in that party, they went to his private home. They went back again. And they were talking about the days in Dublin. Joyce wasn't much interested, but he says, let's have a little game. Let's have a little guessing game. He says, you know Dublin, you just came from Dublin. He says, oh yes, we know Dublin very well, we just came, we know all about Dublin. Well, he says, let's have a little guessing game. Let's start at one end of the streets, of Henry Street or Grafton Street. You start the shops, the number of the shop, the number, the business in it, and the owners of these shops. Go ahead, go ahead. Well, they did. And at the end of the evening, it was Joyce that knew almost everyone along those streets after many years of absences, and the owner and the physical characteristics and their quality and their oddities. They couldn't figure that out. Well, they were about to go home, and he says, Mr. Joyce, when are you coming back to Dublin? He says, did I ever leave it? He desired to be an exile. Well, I'm afraid that was his fate. In my opinion, Joyce lived as he died, an exile.
To make the point that it isn't only the women that are helping Joyce, but Mr. Hicks was the first publisher in this country.
We weren't overlooking Mr. Hicks. We were just letting Mr. Schwartz tell us all everything, then we contradict him afterwards.
Don't lie.
Well, now, Mr. Hicks has an interesting
I'll even miss a
announcement.
train to do it.
I'd just like to ask...
Mr. Hicks, will you come up?
No, just a question. I'm afraid I misunderstood him. Dr. Jones, you say that Miss Weaver backed the publication of Portrait of the Artist?
She was willing to subsidize it.
No.
Well, I've got the contract home.
With
I've got the
the
contract.
American publication?
No, nothing to do with the American publication. There's a contract between Joyce and Pinker. She have her own funds. Pinker was the agent.
But the publication took place first here.
What, at Ulysses?
No. Portrait of the Artist.
Oh, that's not... No, this is what I said about the Portrait of the Artist. It first appeared in the Eggo. She printed it.
So,
That
no, it didn't, though.
Of course
Portrait
it
of
did.
the Artist first appeared.
What?
The Portrait of the Artist.
I'm talking about that. What book
Well,
are you
just
talking
said
about?
publicity. I say the Portrait of the Artist first appeared in the Eggles.
Yes. What is
They
this?
said
What?
that she backed the publication after the printers in England refused it, and it was published in America. She
I
did
don't know,
not
you
back
don't.
the publication.
Simply, this is the story. She published the Portrait of the Artist, and she took the manuscript around to many printers in London. She wanted to publish at her own expense. She's a very wealthy woman, money, nothing. She wanted to help them. She couldn't find anyone to publish it, you see, in this country. Eventually, I said, Hoopsh published it in America.
Yes.
But the
I
sheets were
thought
sent
that
over. The American
when you
sheets...
reverted to it again,
What?
that you said that she backed the publication, which, just for the sake of the record,
Yeah.
I'd like to
No, she was
correct.
willing, she was more than willing to back the publication of Portrait, and she was willing to back, she did back the publication of Ulysses. Mr. Castor.
Yes, unfortunately for Dr. Schwartz's description of Mr. Joyce's interest in his relatives, I must correct him. Only recently I turned over to Ben Hirsch not less than 50 or 60 cards and letters to Giorgio and to my sister,
Yes.
and to my father, who
Yes.
certainly wasn't a relative of his, indicating an active interest.
Yes.
And those letters, by the way, will be published by Mr. Hirsch
Yes.
whenever Stuart Gilbert has the time to get to it.
I said that he adored his son and his daughter.
You may have said he adored him,
Of
you
course I
said he had no interest in his family, he was a complete egoist.
I mean, his
He
outside...
may have been, but he still
His
had a
outside
great
family.
interest in his family.
Yes, no question about it. Yes.
He certainly did.
He was a grandfather.
Mr.
Grandfather.
Yes.
Lovely. He was a great father.
Yes. Mr. Hipsch has an announcement to make. Will you make it, Mr. Hipsch? About the publication,
The Colum is referring, I think, to the new edition of Exiles
Yes.
that is about to appear,
Yes.
which is it's going to a new edition, including the newly discovered notes that Joyce had made, and which are were found with his effects when Mrs. Leon dug them out after the Germans had left Paris. And the notes in the little book are now the property of the Buffalo Library, a library of the University of Buffalo Libraries, is
Yes.
the correct name. And those notes will appear in the edition to which Mr. Colum
You have-
has written an introduction. proof
The
that
notes,
he has
the notes are
made.
not given here. They would be interesting to read, but they're not in this proof.
No, only your introduction is what we want.
Well, there's a quotation from some of the notes that I made, and it's extraordinary. It's very interesting to see what he thought about this play of his. This play, Exiles, most Joyce scholars rather looked down on. They thought it was a derivative from Ibsen, but it's a very important work in its own right. And the notes are very good. What Joyce thought he was doing, one of the things he thought he was doing was creating a new type of European woman. He said that as the Scandinavian creation of the feminine had succeeded the Slav in Turgenev and Tolstoy, so the Celtic woman was going to succeed the Scandinavian. That's an extraordinary idea of Joyce's. It's considering that this character of Bertha is not a very well-known character to Joyce students, and not an outstanding person anyway, I think. But Joyce has these remarkable ideas are in his notes. I thought Mr. Hipsha was good enough to ask me to write the introduction, which meant that I read the play again. I even discovered a misprint, didn't I, Mr. Hipsh? That's been there for years. That's been there for years, and what did you say? I got a great deal out of my rereading of Exiles. First of all, what I get out of it is the most Catholic play that I know. It is the drama of the Catholic conscience, and it begins, the whole tone of the play is extraordinarily interesting when you see it from that point of view, because the whole tone of it is a confession, and the end of it is an act of contrition with the absolution given. It follows the pattern of the confession to an extraordinary degree, and is to me the most profound of the plays of the Catholic conscience that I have ever read. That play, I'm awfully glad that it's been brought to our attention again. Why has it been overlooked so much, Mr. Hitch? You suppose?
No, it hasn't been overlooked. It's included in the volume, the portable Joyce, you see, so it's been available all the time.
It has been available, but it hasn't been read. It's not been overlooked, but it's been overtopped, I suppose.
Treated as a classic, you see.
Yes.
Available but not read.
I'm going to wind up the evening by reading a poem out of Holmes' Penny. She weeps over Rahun. Rain on Rahun falls softly, softly falling where my dark lover lies. Sad is his voice that calls me, sadly calling at grey moonrise. Love, hear thou, how soft, how sad his voice is, ever calling, ever unanswered, and the dark rain falling, then as now. Dark to our hearts, O love, shall lie and cold, as his sad heart has lain, under the moon-grey nettles, the black mould, and muttering rain. I saw Joyce's first Dublin publisher when I was in Dublin, and I begged him to tell me why he had destroyed the copies of Dubliners. And he wouldn't tell me. Well, I said, if you write why you did it, we'll get it published for you, and your name will be to it, and you'll be remembered as the man who, George Roberts, who, so he has agreed to do that. He said he'll send me the manuscript of the story why he destroyed Dubliners, and we'll try to get it published here. It'll be worthwhile. Yes, did you want to say something, Miss Kellogg?
I just want to tell these people that Margaret Anderson, who was the editor of the Little Review and first printed Ulysses in this country, is going to be our guest of honor on the 5th of November, and you're all invited to meet her. And the other announcement is that Miss Keel couldn't come tonight, and she's asked me to take up the
Collection.
collection and the subscriptions, if any want to leave.
Yes, yes. All right, you'll start on that. Come along.